much more than normal people with the kind of headroom. The good news is that when you have this type of a pattern, usually your LV filling pressures are normal. So this is very important to understand. So if you have a relaxation filling pattern, your LV filling pressures are typically normal or low. So in the emergency setting, having this type of filling pattern with low E velocity, high E wave, slow decel time is a good news. Your LV filling is normal. When you have restricted filling, it's the other end. When the E velocity is very high, there's a very rapid filling, it usually means that your LV filling pressures are elevated. There's no argument about that, right? So LV filling pressures are very high. There's a restricted filling, LV is overfilled, overflowing, flooding the lungs, right? So these extremes are good. Now, we are stuck with these two, which is the normal and pseudo-normal, right? So the problem is that once you transition from relaxation to restricted filling, you have this intermediate zone, which is the pseudo-normal filling pattern, which can mimic your normal filling pattern. But it still indicates if your filling pressures are high. So your filling pressures are high. Here we'll say they're very high. Here they're high, and here they're normal, right? And of course, if you're normal, then your filling pressures are always normal. Right? So now let's think about this. So if you have reduced ejection fraction, so patients with reduced ejection fraction, so anybody with systolic dysfunction has diastolic dysfunction. There's no question about it. It's all of them. Everybody who has reduced ejection fraction has some degree of diastolic dysfunction. So the normal doesn't apply anymore. They cannot have normal filling pattern because it doesn't exist. Systolic dysfunction always comes with diastolic dysfunction. So now you're stuck only with these two. So you either have normal filling pressures, which is low E velocity, slow deceleration time, high E wave, or you have high filling pressures. Whether you have normal pattern or restricted pattern, they still indicate that your filling pressures are elevated. So the patient is in heart failure. The left side filling pressures are high. So if you have reduced EF, this part is easy. All you need to do, you don't need tissue Dopplers because tissue Doppler is going to be low. EF is low, tissue Dopplers are low. All you need to know is you look at the mitral inflow, and you usually, in most of the cases, can tell if the filling pressures are high or not. So if they have this type of mitral inflow pattern, you're reassured probably the filling pressures are okay. If they have either pseudo-normal or especially restricted, you definitely know that the filling pressures are high. So they're not. The problem is when you go to preserved EF. So the preserved EF is very tricky because for multiple reasons, it's very complex. I can try to explain to you why. So the problem with this type of a diagram it comes up with every book is that it depends on multiple factors. And one of them is age. So when you're young, let's say like Roberto, in your 20s or even younger, right? Restrictive pattern can be completely normal for younger people with normal EF. The reason is that the ventricle has such a big sucking force when it relaxes that it draws the blood so quickly that it gives you a very high E velocity. So young people, they don't depend on atrial at all. All their filling is done through the sucking force of the LV when it relaxes, right? So it can be normal for younger people. So if somebody's young, you see a restricted filling pattern, and normal EF, you don't freak out. You just say, okay, so this is a young person, it's fine. On the other hand, in older people after age of, let's say, 65 to 75, this pattern becomes normal because your ventricle loses elasticity as you get older. So your relaxation filling pattern kind of is normal for older people because this is how the aged ventricle looks like when they get older. So In these cases, that's when your tissue Doppler becomes important, because in most of the time, the tissue Doppler, you can get a sense where you stand on the filling pressure. So, but not in isolation, but it's very helpful. So what happens usually, normal tissue Doppler. So do you guys understand the concept of tissue Doppler, or more or less?
On a regular basis, or if you give a little quick.
Right. So the tissue Doppler. So when you do the inflow, right, it essentially tells you how the blood flows from the left atrium to the left ventricle. It's essentially the velocity of flow, right? With the tissue Doppler, it's like the mirror image of your inflow. But instead of sampling the blood flow, we're sampling the tissue. So what you want to see is the relaxation, let's say the longitudinal relaxation, we call the E prime. It occurs at the same time as the E velocity. It's the recoil of the myocardium right after the mitral valve opens, right? So the faster is and the bigger is the recoil, the healthier is the myocardium. You want to see good recoil, right? Because the relaxation is an active process, and the faster the myocardium relaxes, the better it is, right? The better is the diastolic function. So we usually sample the tissue Doppler at the mitral annulus, at the septal level, and at the lateral level, right? So then it will show you. So if you imagine this is the left ventricle, right? So you sample here and here. So there will be the septal E prime and the lateral E prime. So the new guidelines suggested the cutoffs of 7 centimeters per second and 10 centimeters per second. So the lateral velocity is usually higher than the septal, even in normal people. So what they said, based on different studies, if you're less than 7, less than 10, there's some degree of impaired relaxation, some degree of diastolic dysfunction. Okay, so what happens as you progress along this curve, right? So you have relaxation, but your filling pressures are normal, and your filling pressures are at big high and extremely high. What happens is that your E velocity slowly goes down, right, to very low levels. So it's like a progressive curve. The good news is that it's with the tissue Dopplers, there's no pseudo-normal. You just have progressive decrease in velocities as you progress from diastolic dysfunction with normal filling pressures to restrictive filling. So here, the tissue velocity should be very low, here lower, and here lower, right? So you just essentially progress along this curve as the disease severity increases, right? So if somebody, again, if you're in the emergency room, somebody got the shortness of breath, and you see the relaxation filling pattern with decreased tissue velocities, you know they have diastolic dysfunction. At the same time, you know that their filling pressures are probably normal. They're not overfilling the ventricle. But once you get to the pseudo-normal with low tissue velocities, or restrictive, especially restrictive filling, it's very low tissue velocities, then you know that there's a problem. So the filling pressure is probably high. The problem with this is that it works in theory beautifully. In practice, it doesn't always work. That's why you need other supportive signs indicating that the filling pressures are elevated. So that's why if you look at the guidelines, they do not suggest using a single measure, like E to E prime ratio, right? But they suggest using other things, like, let's say, LA enlargement, right? Large LA supports the notion that your filling pressures are high. They have diastolic dysfunction. In emergency room and in general, it's very tough to measure the LA volume index because it's a tedious process. You have to open the atrium. It's tough. It's even for text, it's tough. Forget about in the acute setting. The one thing you can do, like a rough measure, would be just to look at if you look at the parasternal. You usually, in the parasternal, you see the left atrium and you see the aorta, right? Let's say this is the mitral valve, this is the aorta coming off. I'm sorry, draw a little well, but this is let's say this is the LA diameter. You can measure the diameter So the LA diameter of 4 or more can be indicative of course, if it's close to 5, then you definitely know how it's big. Again, then it will show you how the diameter, or roughly you can look at the size of the aortic root and the LA. So in normal people, they're very close, like when you look visually. If the LA is significantly bigger than the aortic root, you know that the LA is enlarged. So it's kind of a trick that can help you to see if LA is big or not. Another thing is the TR velocity, right? So TR velocity is the gradient between the right ventricle and the right atrium, and usually is a sign, increased TR velocity is a sign of pulmonary hypertension. Right? So if your velocity is more than 2.8, is usually indicates that there is some degree of pulmonary hypertension. The problem here is that measuring TR velocity, you have to measure at multiple points in multiple views and get the highest velocity, which I don't know how much feasible it is in the emergency room to do it, because even the techs sometimes struggle to get the best view, RV inflow, subcostal, 4-chamber, to get the highest TR velocity and make sure that you're not underestimating the pulmonary pressures, right? Of course, you can look at the IVC and see if RA pressures are elevated. You guys do that all the time, I'm sure. In non-ventilated patients, but ventilated, IVC is going to be endorsed anyway. So, again, I think that with reduced EF, it's a little bit easier to see where you stand on the filling pressures. With preserved EF, you have to look at the multiple data points, not just stick to E to E prime ratio, which progressively goes up as you go through the filling pressures, but also look at other things like is there LVH, is the LA large, there's significant TR, is the RA pressure elevated. So it's kind of, you have to put all this together to get to your conclusion. So this is kind of a brief overview. I hope it is a little bit helpful, but I'll be happy to answer your questions if you have questions about this whole thing. Sure.
Do we use A prime also in TBI to differentiate the normal and pseudo-normal? It should be reversed, right?
Right. The problem is that in the tissue velocities, A prime, it doesn't factor in that much. We look at the mitral inflow when E-to-A ratio is important. With the tissue velocities, less important. Less important because the myocardial recoil with atrial relaxation has little value, less value than recoil after the early filling or during the early filling. So I wouldn't rely on the A prime to make any significant decision. We don't even measure it in the echo while we are very careful about the E prime. So the times when it doesn't work, there are a lot of exceptions, right? So first of all, we mentioned the extremes of age, but let's say if it's a young person with an exhibited pattern, the tissue velocity should be super high. So that would be easy. But there are situations when this thing doesn't work at all. Let's say if you have atrial fibrillation, it's very difficult. There's no ATIC, you cannot decide what's going on with your E-to-A ratio. Every beat is a different beat, right? So even if you calculate the E-to-E prime ratio, they're not the same beat that you're comparing, right? You're comparing different beats. Some people still do it, but I wouldn't do it in atrial fibrillation. I would rely on them. Another thing is all kinds of prosthetic valves. When you manipulate the heart, especially if you're mitral repair, mitral prosthesis, even the aortic prosthesis, because they open the pericardium, this whole thing is not as validated as a native heart. People with, let's say, elderly people with significant mitral annular calcification, right? You see there's a lot of calcium in the valve, a lot of calcium in the annulus. Your recoil goes down, but it doesn't mean that your diastolic dysfunction. It doesn't work. Patients with rheumatic heart disease who have significant mitral stenosis, doesn't work. Because your E velocity is going to be elevated, your E prime is going to be down anyway. So also important to know your exceptions to this diastolic quantification. It's a tough field. It's a tough field. I'm trying to give you like a easy overview, but there are a lot of exceptions to the general concept of how it works. But I think in many cases, if you put it together, it will work. It will give you an idea of what's going on.
So in isolation, just using the mental velocity is probably not sufficient. Adding a tissue doppler gives you a better sense of
Right.
the clients as opposed to the word.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, again, with reduced ejection fractions, most of the times you can get away with just one recoil. The reason is that your recoil is going to be low, so your compliance is going to be low anyway. So in patients with low EF, the tissue velocities are usually low. Especially if we talk about somebody with EF less than 30, their tissue velocities are usually very low. So in these cases, if you have, let's say, this type of filling pattern, you can be, and E velocity is low, less than 50, you can be quite confident that the filling pressures are normal. If you have this type of filling pattern, high ratio, E velocity is high, especially if it's more than 100 centimeters per second, can be almost 100% confident that the filling pressures are high. So, in our practice, like in the lab, the way I usually report this with preserved EF or no, there are situations where you can't, then you don't comment on it, you don't say anything. It's better not to mislead people, right? But in general, I would say abnormal filling pattern is suggestive of elevated filling pressures. If I know that I'm confident the filling pressures are high, or I would say resting LV filling pressures are probably normal. That means I'm confident that the LV filling pressures at this stage are normal. So this is essentially what the treating physicians are looking for. Yeah, you can report the stages or whatever, but nobody really understands what it means. The internal medicine physician who reads this report and sees that, was like, what does it mean? When you say that the filling pressures are high or normal, people kind of get an idea, okay, so maybe this is heart failure, maybe this is not heart failure. So,
So tying this back into a screen for hypertensive heart disease, sort of what the PI for this study is thinking about, would it be, so we would sort of think like, if someone has, we're going to do these three assessments.
Okay.
Right? Like if someone has LVH, then they are hypertensive heart disease positive.
Right.
So the rest of it doesn't matter as much, we'll still do it. Systolic, we're going to either measure or visually estimate, let's say above 50 or above 55% versus below 55%. So
Okay.
these two are pretty straightforward.
right.
And then it seems like by doing the combination of tissue Doppler and mitral inflow velocity, we'd be able to get a sense of their diastolic dysfunction by looking at the already established parameters. Like I think by the literature that we were looking at, it was 8, but you're saying the new guidelines said 7 centimeters of
the septal.
septal. Yeah.
Right.
So would one way to simplify this, and tell me if it's too much of an oversimplification, if visually estimating someone's ejection fraction and it's low, and you see this pattern, then you're really looking at this, not this.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
And if they have preserved EF, then it could be either, or it's definitely this. Preserved could be either.
Preserved could be
Preserved could be either, and then you really have to look at the tissue Doppler to assess that. Okay. So in terms of screening, LVH we measure, systolic function we measure, and then diastolic function. If they have preserved ejection fraction, you really need to look at this carefully.
Absolutely.
If they have a reduced ejection fraction, first of all, they've already screened in, so it kind of doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
But we can more confidently tell the difference then because they're out of this category. If they have a lower ejection fraction, they're already over here.
Okay.
So maybe in terms of practicality, what we could focus on in the hands-on session is just, measuring free wall thickness. I think that's probably going to be easier than looking at mass, and we don't have to worry about how tall people are, et cetera.
Right, mass is complicated. Yeah, I think you can just do thickness. I think
So if we're thinking about free wall thickness, and ejection fraction. I think going over Simpson is helpful. We might wind up, since we grossly estimate ejection fraction in these broad categories
Right.
a lot, normal, abnormal. You know, we don't say 40 versus 45%, but we'll say good versus not. So EF, and then looking
How to
at
get E and how to get E prime.
yeah.
Okay. That's fair.
I think that would, for us, be the most high yield things, and we're still not worthy with only bringing you cookies, but we really appreciate it.
So with LVH, so you want to measure the septum and the posterior wall, or just posterior wall?
I would say what the most standard thing would be. I mean, I've seen some that describe looking at the LV free wall and then diastole, and as that would be a signal measurement. But
So there are two ways to do it, right? Some people say you measure both, and then you report both. The problem with it is that as you get older, your septum, you've probably seen this, you get more sigmoid septum, right? So you'll have something like this. If you look at the, let's say, portion of view, right? So your septum will be thickened in this portion, and when you look at the parasternal, again, this part will be thickened. And this is part of normal aging when your septum gets more sigmoid and thickened. So many studies, when they used the thickness, when that was the thickness, they specifically measured the posterior wall because it doesn't get affected by aging as much as, let's say, the septum. You get bulged and sigmoid. And then when you have this sigmoid septum, sometimes you don't know where to measure. Well, should I measure right at the microvalve tips when it's thicker, or I'll go a little bit more down where it's less thin? It's a bit tricky.
So it's like the standard of care is posterior wall.
So studies are different, right?
Oh,
Some studies use both, some studies, but I think if you're measuring for the study purpose, I would do both, because you're not losing anything. Because if the reviewer comes back and tells you, oh, but what about the septum? Why didn't you measure the septum? Then we'll be like, okay, well, we have the septum. Right. And the posterior wall, so then it will show you how to measure it correctly. So sometimes when you see in parasternal view, you see the papillary muscle coming off. So you have to tell where's the wall, where's the papillary muscle, so you won't measure the pap muscle and make it like artificially thick. And he'll show you how to measure the septum correctly. I guess Roberto's not going to have bulge, but if you had somebody with septal bulge, like an older person, it'll be. I mean, you usually try to avoid the bulge portion and measure it more with like a thinner, normal portion of the septum.
More towards the apex, you saying? Like more towards the apex, away from...
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the guidelines, they say measure at the level of microvalve tips, both the septum and the posterior wall, right? So they say you see where the tips of the microvalve are, and then measure your septal thickness and the posterior wall thickness. The problem is in elderly people, sometimes they have this prominent bulge, just that bulge, and the rest of the ventricle is thin. So if you measure at that, you'll be like, oh, yes, significant LVH, but it's localized to the basal septum. So sometimes what the studies did, they just said, okay, we're going to ignore the bulge and measure it right after the bulge. But that is what you described in that study, what they did.
Is it strict quantitative measurements? Is it like a strict cutoff measurements, like for LVH?
Yeah, so in the guidelines, if you look at the guidelines, they consider 1.1. It's not that right there, but in general, in the guidelines, 1.1 centimeters or 11 millimeters as the cutoff for normal. Once you exceed that, it's considered LVH.
And that's during diastole.
Yeah, that's diastole.
Right.
That's the diastole. Absolutely.
Okay.
And then for the E prime, I told you what are the current cutoffs. Good enough.
10 times better than good. Yes, thank you
No,
so much.
sure, of course. Yeah, and listen, if you have any questions as you go along, you can always, either call or comment, and I'll be happy to.